I'm Chris Richardson, and this is Not a Pipe Podcast. Today, I'm really happy to be speaking with Gary Hall, author of Pirate Philosophy for Digital Posthumanities. He is a really interesting and provocative thinker. I had the pleasure of speaking with him a little while ago, in which he calls me out on some of my own ideas, and while perhaps not the most comfortable thing to experience, I would say we would all benefit from more pirate philosophy. So I really enjoyed this interview. Gary, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about what it means to be a pirate, especially in the context of philosophy and the post-humanities that you're speaking about.
So the first thing I want to say is I'm not just interested in the conventional kind of piracy, I guess. I use the word pirate in my work, and not so much in the sense of, I think most people will be thinking of that historical romantic outsider of fiction and film. They'll all be thinking of Johnny Depp and Captain Jack Sparrow, or you've even got, the online libertarian pirates associated with things like Pirate Bay. But I'm playing more on the way the word pirate began to appear in the texts of people like the ancient Greeks and the Romans. And there it was more directly related to the verb, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this. My ancient Greek is really great, but it's pirao, which is to make an attempt or try or test. And that's kind of got that's where the modern term pirate has its origins. So what I'm kind of doing around piracy, in that sense of the pirate, is I'm acting as someone who tries and tests and teases and troubles things. So that's the kind of sense. That's what I mean by piracy. And if I was to be something like a pirate, that's the kind of pirate I'd be.
And so when you got this notion of pirate and started to play with it, was there a first inkling that might be the way to go? I'm curious if you picked this up, maybe you noticed the definition and the historical context of pirates, or how did this whole thing get started for you?
No, piracy is just one thing I do, and I kind of move around. So I'm trying not to, it might sound odd, but I'm trying not to come up with a kind of a unique, if you like, identity, or a kind of a single unified philosophy that I'm applying in different situations. So one of the things, what I tend to do is more as I collaborate with people. Obviously, I collaborate with a lot of colleagues that I actually work with, but I collaborate with people that I don't work with in the sense of engaging with their texts. So kind of one of the things I was thinking I might do and might be kind of fun is if I collaborated with you a little bit and collaborate with you around the podcast and was just bounce some ideas, starting with the podcast and kind of moving on from that and trying to explain what I do and why I do it in that way.
Yeah.
Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's hear what it sounds like to hear a pirate engage you.
Oh God, I'm going to avoid anything to do with parrots and all that kind of stuff. So in my work, I kind of engaging with people in that way. And like in the book, it's people like Rosie Braidotti and Lev Manovich and Bernard Stiegler and things like that. Mm-hmm. But if I was going to do it around your work and around the video, I'd kind of be, picking up on some of the things you say on your about page. You've got that nice little video. And you're talking about the painting by Magritte, where you got the title, This Is Not a Pipe. And you're talking about the contrast between the surface and the inner meaning or the material reality and the behind-the-scenes story. So I'd be kind of interested in things like, the podcasts focus a lot on books. Mm-hmm. And noticed even the recommended reading that interviewees provide, they're all 5 books. So I'd be wanting to ask, what is it that's so important about books and what's the inner meaning of this?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that I didn't really think about until actually reading your book, Pirate Philosophy, about the emphasis we put in academia, in particular on books. One of the interesting things, especially thinking about what you're saying about open access in the book, is that I at first was toying with the idea of interviewing people in relation to articles, which, could be from anything really, or stuff that they're putting out there. But then what I realized is, for one, I wanted to make them available if possible, or at least give links to them.
Yeah.
And I realized that I couldn't really do that with a lot of articles because there's all the paywalls.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, especially like I said, thinking with what you're saying, because it applies without me even realizing it to the podcast.
Yeah.
I wanted to do, recommended readings just in general.
Yeah.
And now I ask for recommended books because I can easily kind of say, here's the book. I can link to Amazon. If anyone actually buys it from the site, I think I get about 3 cents for the book.
Wow.
But also, there's no similar thing I can do unless it's open access and I put PDFs up. But then I'm a little worried that I think it will be open access and it won't. And so therefore it'll be, I'll end up getting sued or something. And then this whole thing goes down the drain.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And when I'm asking these questions, I'm not kind of taking this moral position. I'm just kind of interested and like I say, kind of maybe having a bit of fun and teasing a little bit. So I understand why that is the case. I suppose in some of the things that we do, we would kind of deliberately focus on just things that we could make links to, so articles or things like that. So again, another questions I might raise and what I'd be thinking for, and that would be kind of stimulating for me to pursue, is the books. When you have links, you've seen where you can buy the books and things. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of them that I clicked on, they take you straight to Amazon. And so, one of the things, we might want to ask, well, why Amazon? You've already kind of answered why not any kind of shadow libraries like ARG or Library Genesis and things like that. But I'm just kind of thinking, were there any alternatives? Did you think about that? Were you just, it wasn't something that would actually occur to you and it's only kind of occurred to you now? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's also a really funny thing that, very brief history of me. I came from Toronto where I got my degrees and where I grew up in Canada. I mean, I haven't been there for a while now. I haven't been living there, so I don't know if the things have significantly changed, but piracy laws in particular were arguably weaker in Canada than they are in the US. Definitely not draconian in the sense that you'll go to jail or anything.
Yeah.
And so, especially as a grad student making very little money, I pirated a significant bit. I was a big fan of Pirate Bay in particular. And among other ethical justifications was I'm trying to get access to things so that I can learn, so it's educational, but also because I'm poor. And then if I had money, I would support these people. And they're not really suffering from me anyway, from my viewing, because I'm not taking away anything.
Yeah.
But anyway, we go into all of that. But then I come to the US and realize that if especially now, which is super scary because I'm from Canada, I don't have to suffer from a lot of the prejudice and stereotypes that other immigrants have to suffer from in particular. Yeah. But if I'm caught, for example, stealing something or even just sued saying like I'm linking to something that's technically illegal in the US, I lose my job and I'm thrown out. So it's a very scary, scary thing for me to be thinking about that.
Yeah.
I think I would like to say that I'd be a lot bolder in terms of taking a stance or taking a risk, I guess, if I were in a country that wouldn't throw me out or potentially send me to jail. I don't even know what would happen these days.
And is that a recent thing that you feel in the US?
More
given change of presidency?
Yeah, more so in particular because when I got here, you go through this process and they literally ask you in immigration papers and stuff like that, are you a terrorist? Have you ever been a terrorist? And so, I was able to check no. And so I guess I passed that part. But what really happens is that they, there's a lot of wording basically that if you're convicted of any kind of crime, which in the US can, that can be something very simple that could basically derail you. But now I've heard that if you just simply fail to send a change of address, if you were to move from one apartment to another or something, you could technically be kicked out of the country. So that's a recent thing that's, makes me hesitant to put anything that I'm not sure of. So then I go,
I feel so guilty about raising this.
Well, no. It's, no, it's cool because what I was thinking when I was reading the intro, or I guess it's chapter 1 in your book, is that you're saying, like you described earlier, a pirate is someone who tests things out, puts to proof, or in some cases teases or gives trouble and stuff like that. And I really I couldn't picture what that really meant until I read the next chapter, and you basically do that to all of these other Stiegler and Berdotti and others, like you said. No, I think it's really interesting, and I think it should be.
No, I'm doing it for you.
Yeah, yeah. So it's always more fun to watch the pirates than to be exposed by the pirates. But I think intellectually, that's exactly what we should be doing.
And now we've mentioned terrorism on this, we're just going to get so done by various.
Yeah.
So that's some of the questions I'd be. I mean, I'm not immune to this. I mean, people are asking, okay, so you've done this book and it's about these issues, but it's still with MIT. It's still a kind of quite a conventional book. You still have to buy it. And this is all the case, but I'm kind of, one thing we might say is, well, can anyone think of, a theorist, a philosopher who doesn't write those kind of texts, those kind of books? It's very hard to think of someone who has kind of moved away or left that behind, or you can think of a few people that experiment with both, but most people, the kind of theorists that you're in, cultural studies people and media studies people that are engaging with on the podcast, they're all dealing with, they're all publishing in those kind of texts, aren't they? They're all doing that, and I'm doing it myself. I mean, one of the questions people ask is about that, and partly one of my answers is, well, yes, because you have to do a certain amount of that, and you probably wouldn't be talking to me if I hadn't done that. Another thing is, well, all but one of the chapters is available online for free in other forms. So you kind of think, when people ask you that and challenge you over that, it's interesting that they're still privileging the book form over all the other different forms that material can be found in, and they could, they can just about reconstitute the book themselves if they wanted from those different places. So it's kind of interesting, and that's why I started off by raising it, the power and the authority and the work that the book still kind of does.
Yeah, well, and that, I guess, as a Canadian, that was holding off by trying to be polite, but now we can get to the more difficult pirate questions on my part. How do you...
I want to know, are Canadians more polite than the English?
I think so. I think you guys say your insults in a more polite way, is what I've heard.
That's probably very true.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think, we would be the first to apologize. So I'm sorry to ask, but no, but you already mentioned it. You're publishing in MIT Press, and you're dealing with this. If you want to think of it as a sort of game or a system of cultural capital, you're dealing with it. So how do you stay in it and not necessarily outside it, but also sort of espouse some of those outsider mentalities or ideas? How do you negotiate that?
Yeah, as you say, these are the kind of ideas I want to ask, and that's why I've started with these. They're a kind of the common sense ideas that we all kind of have. I mean, Gramsci kind of calls them, common sense ideas, ideology, the things that we take for granted. Those are the things that I want to kind of ask questions about, raise. I mean, it's quite hard to do that without slipping back into those common senses, those kind of cliches. It takes a bit of time and work and care. And I'm kind of nervous about doing it just on a podcast because it's hard to improvise like this, but I'm going to do my best for you. But that's partly why I'd say I'd still work in a university for all the problems with the nature of the university as an institution that we know about, the commercialization and the corporatization and so on. But I still want to work in that university, in that institution, because it seems to me it's a space where you still can ask those kind of difficult, critical questions of things that the rest of society might take for granted or prefer to take for granted. It seems to me that the universities are kind of a testing ground for that, for the creation and development of those kind of new ideas and practices and subjectivities and kind of ways of being. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to work within that particular institution. It's not just that institution, but other ones as well. I know some of the podcasts I was listening to and people were talking about wanting to communicate with a wider audience. Mm-hmm. And I'm not really always sure that that's what I want to do. Sometimes I do that, but a lot of times I kind of think as academics or theorists, we need to be kind of bold and risk-taking and obviously cheeky and provocative and challenging. It kind of seems to me that the rest of contemporary culture seems to place a really high premium on being, popular and inclusive and accessible. I feel like that it's important there are some places for exploring ideas that are maybe difficult and challenging and time consuming to understand. So for me, that's another reason why I want to work in the university. We kind of don't have to go along with those kind of ideas. And I can ask stroppy questions like, why is this available for sale on Amazon?
Yeah, well, but then at the same time, you could, I guess, in this place where you're able to ask these questions, push boundaries in terms of, I guess, maybe resisting not just the academic or for-profit journals and presses, but also the idea of the fact that you need to claim your status by writing books as opposed to other things.
Oh.
How do you fit that into your idea of self? Because that's another thing that you sort of challenge, right? Is the idea of the authorial voice, but at the same time, this is a book written by Gary Hall, and it's a book.
Yeah,
I don't know. How do you problematize that, but not move so far away that you're no longer a part of it?
Well, I mean, in some projects, I probably am less a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Not all my projects take place in the university, and some are more concerned with art or activism or technology or business, and they're exploring with those. But particularly with pirate philosophy, I mean, one of the ways I was doing, as we've talked about, I try and move away from that idea of, I'm a unified sovereign subject. I've got, that kind of romantic or modernist idea of the self-identical author. And one way I do it is, as you've said, I'm kind of engaging with people like Manovich and Stiegler and Braidotti, and I'm kind of working quite closely with them. The idea is, I'm not really saying anything that they're not already saying in the particular chapters that I'm talking about. What I'm trying to do is kind of just push their ideas, if you like, to their almost logical conclusions, where they're almost creating problems for themselves and their own way of acting and being as theorists or philosophers. So the idea is partly it's not quite so easy to tell all the time whether it's me or whether it's them. So that's kind of one way, and that's, again, the kind of thing I'm trying to enact, or it's difficult with you in the podcast. Is trying to improvise that, but I'm doing my best.
Well, do you think that there is a place where, let's say, assuming that we keep a somewhat similar system of tenure and promotion, the kinds of things that we've seen for a long time in the university system, is there a place to say that rather than the monograph, there's an opportunity to somehow, in some way, perform piracy or become a pirate philosopher and therefore engage in provocative ways that will be recognized? Or is that something that's completely outside of that realm of maintaining your status as a professor?
Well, you've got to do both. There's no point us being, if you become excluded, then you don't have access to any of this. I mean, one of the good things about the university is it's this, I think this is something from the Undercommons, the Morton and Hartley book. They talk about the university being this incredible gathering of resources.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can use that to do interesting things. You can also try and use it. I mean, one of the things, people do ask, it's okay for you. You're at a certain stage of your career. You're a kind of professor. You get to do these things. But kind of guess I've always done them. My response to something like that is, well, as a professor, one of the things I get told is I have to be, a leader in the field. I have to do things that other people aren't doing yet. So one way is to maybe not pitch this all the time as something that's outside or alternative. One way of saying, okay, so you want me to innovate, or, a more friendly business term would be disrupt.
Mm-hmm.
You want me to do that? Well, okay, this is what this looks like. You can take those ideas and you explore them. I mean, the other thing to talk about, talking about the relationship to the inside and the outside is I don't try to do this all at the same time. So I'm not trying to take, idea of the author, idea of copyright, idea of fixed and finished objects, whether it's a book or an article. I'm not trying to do all that all at once. Jacques Derrida has that notion of the semi-transcendental. Best way I can explain this is, do you, in either Canada or the US, do you have that whack-a-mole game?
Yeah.
You go and you have a hammer and the mole pops up and you hit one and then it pops down and then another one pops up. Well, it's a bit like that. You take a concept that you're interested in, say it would be copyright, and then you explore that. But other concepts You can't at the same time, take on the book or the library or say the author that we're talking about. You can't do everything all at the same time. So what I'm often doing is working on specific projects and specific instances that are tackling these kind of issues. And I'm trying to, if you like, re-articulate them. I'm trying to take them apart and then reconstruct them in a different way.
And I'm thinking that if somebody were to potentially, I guess depending on their reading of your book, if they were to push it and say, we want to make everything open and continuing in the sense that it's not a final published book or something, it's something that we're going to keep building on.
Yeah.
And therefore, so it's not the traditional thing. I guess what my fear would be as somebody who's, raised in traditional institutions and stuff like that would be not only that people wouldn't take me seriously, but that it wouldn't be as good. Like it wouldn't be as rigorous and it wouldn't be as intellectually solid as something that is a book because you're worried about finishing it. Yeah. What I want to ask is, we've seen, we all have here access to YouTube and to different various podcasts, mine being one of them, right? There's all these things out there. Some of them are quite high quality, I would say, in terms of intellectual rigor, philosophy. Some of them are almost just garbage.
Yeah.
The idea of peer review and the idea of these established publications is that garbage shouldn't get through. So are you confident that if we were to change this system, that we wouldn't be just letting in a lot of other things that really aren't what we want to be doing in philosophy or critical studies?
No, I'm not confident of that, but I'm not confident we're not already doing it. I suppose my point and the thing we're talking about is, criticality. How can we maintain that criticality? And I'm thinking of something that Stiglitz talks about, and he talks about a mode of, technological change creates an opportunity. It creates an opportunity for you to raise the kind of questions that you wouldn't have otherwise. So all the kind of professional signs of authority and prestige that you're talking about, what I'm saying is, we just take them for granted. We kind of don't think about them. We're critical about all other kinds of media. So we're critical in the UK, we're critical of the BBC, and we're critical of Twitter, and we're critical of film, and we're engaging that. But one of the things we don't look at too much is the media that we use, and it's kind of it's too much of an unthought. And then we assume that if we're publishing a book and it's got Harvard or Yale or Cambridge or Oxford University Press on it, and it looks really nice and shiny, and it's copy edited and it's printed in a uniform edition, all that signs we go, hey, we don't have to think about this too much anymore. That's legitimate. That's authoritative. We can relax. We can switch off and we can think about other things. And what I'm trying to say is, those kind of common sense ideas, maybe we need to think about them. Maybe we shouldn't be switching off. That's our job, isn't it? It's our job is to kind of think about these things. And more what I'm saying is we're not going to have too much of a choice, because the more and more that we are changing for all the reasons that you've talked about. This is a podcast. This isn't a written interview. It's not a written, published print journal. More and more we're engaging with different media. We can't have the same rules and criteria apply. That's not to say we don't have criteria. It's just that we've got to have different criteria, and we need to think about it. And we should have been thinking about them anyway. We should have been thinking about the book. We should have been thinking about that notion of the single author. We should have been thinking about all of those things. In particular, theorists should be thinking about it. It just seems odd to me that, we've got all these kind of philosophers and theorists who write about movements such as Occupy, and the student protests and all those much more horizontal, decentered movements. And they talk about the new kind of forms of subjectivity and social organization that these movements are experimenting with. But the way they kind of do that is just, carry on. It's single authored. It's almost, I'm going to extract that knowledge. I'm going to privatize it. I'm going to publish it. My career will kind of go on fine. But it's exactly what we complain about when, say, someone like Facebook does it. So it seems to me that we need to be experimenting with some of those new forms ourselves. That doesn't mean we have to kind of copy Occupy or whatever like that, but I'm just thinking, what would it be for us to work in different ways? Can we work in why our professional is still really based on the book? And again, something else I was seeing in pirate philosophy is, look, that kind of system of peer review, it hasn't really changed for hundreds of years. I mean, you'd recognize people in the 18th century would recognize it. So is it still applicable? Does it still apply in now in the 21st century? Will it still apply in 20 years? Should we start thinking about it? And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe we can do some interesting, exciting things about it, but we have to involve ourselves with it. Otherwise, we're just going to have Facebook and Academia EDU and Amazon, and they're going to do it for us. And all we're going to do is the choices that they give us. But maybe we want to do something that we think is important and valuable and meaningful for us.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that you mentioned that I had thought about before, but it sparked a few new ideas. Obviously with Aaron Swartz and the whole issue of piracy in terms of journals and the profit-making journals that are effectively, extracting labor from the state if the state is paying for university education, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But also academics doing a lot of free labor, editing, peer review, stuff like that. And then that getting put into a place that you have to pay very large sums of money to has for a while at least been on a lot of people's radar, I think, or at least a number of people's radar.
Yeah.
I thought, to some extent, what else would you do other than sharing this stuff, which would be nice? What other options are there? But then thinking after reading this, there is a massive amount of free labor that academics do, and they're the only real thing that it seems like some of the companies do that catalog and keep this is simply do that. They catalog it and then they make it available on a database, which I think a lot of universities could already do. Why haven't, in your ideas or in your opinions, why haven't we moved to this, especially after that, after Aaron Swartz's suicide and after, what's it called again? When, not the uprising, but the
academic spring and all that.
Academic spring. Yeah. Why haven't we moved into a we already do the self-review kind of thing among ourselves. Why haven't we taken over that role of the journals, do you think?
Yeah. It's a big question. Does seem, one argument is that what mainly the companies spend their money on is protecting their intellectual property rights. I mean, that's where a lot of it goes. We could do a lot of that for ourselves. I mean, that's partly what some of the people I'm working with do at Open Humanities Press, the Radical Open Access Collective. It's all about saying, look, we don't have to go through those channels. We can do this more and more for ourselves. It raises interesting questions. At the same time, I'm not trying to, I don't want to beat up on anybody that isn't doing this. I mean, it can be hard. It can be challenging. If we want to change, if we don't want the system to run in the same old way, then we all have to change the way that we're working. We all have to do a little bit, and that includes academics. It includes librarians. You might want to start your own open press. You can take our software. You can take our ideas. You can even, we've given our books to people. You can take all of those and just try it and do it yourself. Copy it, reiterate it, play with it.
I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the Open Humanities Press and your experiences that you found worked well, and maybe some things that you didn't anticipate that didn't work as well.
Open Humanities Press, we originally came about because, I started publishing with a few others an open access journal in about 1999, I think it was, called Culture Machine. So we were doing that for a few years, and then met up with David and Siggy, who are my colleagues on Open Humanities Press, and they had an idea of bringing together a bunch of open access journals, because one of the things about publishing an open access journal is it can be really good, but because it's online and it's open access, it just didn't have the same kind of status, prestige as, journal published by a legacy university press. So we had the idea of bringing a whole bunch of them together, kind of forming a collective, and the idea that we would have more authority and status and respect if we worked as a group. And that seems to happen, A lot of the journals in Open Humanities Press have reported that they get, when now and again a particular government will try and rank journals and things like that, and they report that because they're part of Open Humanities Press, and because we have we deliberately went for a very prestigious international editorial board. Because they have all that, they get ranked highly, even though they're online only. even though they're open access and all those kind of things. So that's kind of worked. And then people were saying, okay, so you can do that with journals, but it's easy to do it with journals. You can't really do it with monographs. You can't publish them online and make them openly available for authors to publish and for readers to read. And so we're not very good at people telling us we can't do things. So we decided to give that a go. And so we've set up a number of book series, which that still seems to be going. I think to date we've published something like almost like 40 what you call traditional type monographs. I mean, they're traditional in the sense of you can get them in paper version. They look just like any other monograph. The only difference is you can get them for free online in PDF and other formats. So yeah, that's kind of gone quite well and better than we had expected. What has not turned out so well, particularly when we started things like the Culture Machine Journal, you're kind of thinking, oh, this will be all interactive and people will want to engage with it and things like that. And for the most part, people don't want to do that. They still want to engage in the traditional ways. They're not, you build in all these features of interactivity and people still don't want to do that. And it's very noticeable about two of the book series, more experimental book series we did with Open Humanities Press. So one was living books, living books about life, and we got some funding to do that. So that looks very nice. It looks very glossy. We have what looks like book covers, and so it looks much nicer. So what happens with that is people want to be in that series, but people don't want to engage. All those books are free for people to read and to write. So they're all published on a wiki, so people can get engaged and they can change them and they can edit them, they can add content, they can do all that. But because they look so nice, people don't do it, which I'm always surprised at. We've all read Roland Barthes, we've all read Michel Foucault and the author, and you still kind of, people still respect it. We have another series, which is slightly bit older, and that's called Liquid Books, and that is, we didn't have any money for that, and that is much more rough and ready, precisely what you were talking about before. It doesn't look finished, it looks kind of half completed, it's much more provisional, and so we get less people wanting to publish in it, but we have far more people wanting to be part of the project, to engage with the books. Some of the books have quite a lot of engagement. So it's kind of interesting when you start out. I always tell people when they're starting about journals, they always want, we want the interactivity and things. You've got to think, you've got to be careful about that, because you could spend a lot of time and money on it, but people might not want to use it. Things. So that was kind of interesting.
It raises a question for me that I have been talking to a number of people on the podcast and elsewhere about. What should the role of the philosopher or the academic be in terms of speaking to other academics and philosophers, but also other people in the community? On the extreme, some people say that anything a philosopher says should be basically accessible, because if you're using too much jargon or you're using complexity to show how smart you are or something, that's really not what you ought to be doing.
Yeah.
But then the other sort of extreme is really that you're a professional in what you do, and if doctors, medical doctors, started using words like tummy and stuff like that, it wouldn't be very effective. And so you need to speak at a high level, and if not everyone can understand, that's to be expected. I'm wondering how you feel and how that ties into the pirate philosophy.
Okay. Well, I've got a number of answers to that. I mean, firstly, we don't have one role. So it depends. I talked before about having kind of specific projects for specific situations. So some projects I might want to talk to a wider audience. So you would adjust it for that. You would adjust your language. You would adjust whichever media you use. Some projects I might be wanting to make a specific intervention. And so then you would choose the media and the language that was appropriate to do that. So it's not that we have just one role. If you're going to really kind of push me into think, who is my audience? I don't feel like I have a community out there that I'm trying to speak to or reach. I think one of the things, one of the personas I talk in the book, and picking up on Rosie Braidotti's idea of of adopting different personas or modes of subjectivity, to talk about subjectivity being different and being more fluid. And she's kind of, I'm trying to push that idea. Look, if we're going to talk about the post-human in our theory, well, what is it to act as a post-human subjectivity? I mean, one of my issues with theorists of the post-human is they might talk about it, but they tend to, the way that they perform their role is pretty much as a liberal humanist. So I'm kind of thinking how to do that, and one of the things she talks about is adopting different personas, so the feminist, cyborg, she even talks about Dolly the sheep and things like that. And so pirate, for me, would be one of them. Another of them would be Jean-Francois Lyotard's notion of the experimenter, where he's got an essay called The Tomb of the Intellectual. And again, the government, that was a response to the French government in the 1980s, saying to philosophers, look, you have to speak to a community, you have to speak to society, that's your job. And what he was saying is, no, that isn't my job. My job as a philosopher is not to kind of know who my community is. My job is to kind of work, out what it is to be a philosopher. Or if you're a writer, it's to work out what it is to be a writer. If you're an artist, it's to work out, what is art? What is it to be an artist? And so that's partly what I'm thinking. I don't feel I have a community out there. And in fact, what I'm trying to do with all these different projects is to create a community. To create a community, you're talking about, there's all these possibilities, but people haven't moved towards that, or they haven't taken advantage of it. Part of what I'm trying to do is say, look, we can do this. We can think of these things differently. We can push ourselves. So if we're interested in the post-human, then we don't have to just act in the way that we think about that and discuss about it and write about it as liberal humanists. How can we actually act in a way that's consistent with our theory? And that's kind of important to get back to the kind of the thrust of your question. That's important in a societal terms, in terms of society and that kind of response, because one of the things, say for example, around the work around the Anthropocene and why people are interested in the non-human, the object, the planet, the environment. The idea of that is, well, if we can think about our place in the world differently, then maybe we'll act towards the world. We'll have a different way of acting towards the world, which we won't be destroying the environment. We'll have a more caring and responsible way of approaching that. And I suppose one of my issues is, well, I really agree with that, but the way that most theorists, and this is kind of what I'm saying around Rosie Braidotti and Stiegler in the book, is they may say this, but the way that they actually act is they just continue to act as a liberal humanist. And so they're not actually breaking down that divide between the human and the non-human. They're actually reinforcing it, not in the content of the work, but in the actually way that they act as theorists or philosophers or academics. So for me, this is not just it's not just literally an academic issue. It's figuring out how society can operate differently.
Well, and one of the things that really made me think about, I guess, see myself reflected, is the idea that this extra labor time and this spillage into leisure time. So using Twitter to show who you are and realizing that if you're posting only your work or your academic persona, people aren't going to necessarily follow you. So it's counterproductive. And so what you really have to do is show yourself or your personal life. But then that's in order to some extent to gain a bigger following, which is better for your academic career. And so there's all this labor that goes into speaking and addressing the public in different ways and different communities of professionals that you might think is leisure time, like Facebook, social media, but also it's work. I mean, it's extra work that more and more of us are doing, especially because of the precarious labor situation in the universities. When you're talking in response to your last answer, thinking about different personas or becoming whatever it is that you're becoming at the moment, is there a difference? Is there a difference between exploring who you are or like pushing your own subjective boundaries in a somewhat fulfilling way versus doing it because the state or the government or the university is telling you you need to make yourself more public, you need to have your ideas heard more? Is there a separation or a difference between one or the other, or does that even matter today?
No, completely matters. Yeah, so one of my issues, I mean, you're right, we can share our work on different platforms in different ways. And one of my issues around, yes, the kind of platforms you've talked about, or Twitter or Instagram or all of those, yeah, they turn us into little micro entrepreneurs ourselves. We're selling our lives, what's happening with us and what we like. We kind of do that. And what I'm interested in is the way that when academics respond to that or deal with that, their default mode is they just flip back into the liberal humanists, like we should go back to the public university, we should go back to books, we should go back to journals. But they're not thinking of books and journals and the university as it's just another form of media, and it's another form of liberal media. So for me, that kind of, if you had a crude characterization of new media and Twitter and so, it's a kind of more neoliberal, individualistic, more focused on positioning yourself as an entrepreneur, and then you go back to that more liberal version of the public university and the book and things. For me, they're part of the same continuum. I mean, liberal and neoliberal, they're part of the same. In fact, that's how neoliberalism is being able to kind of adopt and co-opt us so easily. And going back to an earlier question, why don't we not struggle against this? Why have more of us not kind of resisted or done something different? So it's really important that we do something different, which is partly why I was kind of teasing you right at the beginning about Amazon and things like that, because we could choose, different platforms. It doesn't mean that we just never use new media. I'm using new media all the time. My university keeps telling me, you should be on Twitter, you should be on Facebook, Instagram and things, but I don't want to be on any of those platforms. You can use different ones that bring out other tendencies, if you like, that you can experiment with kind of other ways of being that are not quite so entrepreneurial or individualistic or consumer orientated, that you could work, that would be more non-profit, that would be more collaborative, all those kind of things that I'm trying to push in the book and saying that's what we're experimenting with projects like Open Humanities Press and others. The idea is you've got to make some choices. You've got to make some ethical and political decisions over that, and not just think, my only options are the two kind of things that you asked in your question.
Well, I want to hear a little bit about what you have to say about power and all of that, because you've kind of alluded to the idea. There are people, there are academic superstars that can basically say, I mean, not quite on a Taylor Swift level, but they can say, I'm boycotting this social media or this program, and if you want my books, you have to go to XYZ or whatever. Sure. But then there's so many graduate students, there's so many precariously employed adjuncts and stuff like that, that to tell them, don't go on Twitter because there's a nonprofit organization that will link you to other people in a more ethical way, which I don't think it's hard to find more ethical places than Twitter, Amazon, stuff like that. But it is very hard to find places that will support a large community, or that will attract a large community potentially, and that will support certain things that are going on right now. So how do you negotiate this power imbalance? Because academic superstars can say, screw Twitter, I'm not going to touch Facebook. You want to follow me, follow this new program that I'm endorsing. But then there's a lot of people who want to engage with critical theory, cultural studies, and what have you, that I don't want to be a downer and just say that they don't have that choice, but it's a lot more difficult. So how do you negotiate power in that sense?
Of course. Well, I mean, again, you've got to be thinking carefully about what you're doing. So, for example, something like Open Humanities Press, we deliberately went for an international advisory board that had the academic superstars on it. Because what we wanted to say is, those are the people that at this point are fed up with traditional publishing and can also take a chance. I mean, this was back in whenever it was, 2006 when we started, 2008, I think we went public. They can take a chance and say, it doesn't matter where I publish now. I'm established enough. I can publish with these guys. And the idea of that was, you build up a bit of prestige, so it makes it possible for other people who are not seen as academic superstars that they can actually, it gets to the stage where they can take a chance on it as well, where it's not such a big leap, where their tenure committees or their hiring committees are still going to go, okay, so you're publishing with this kind of press, but hey, that's a good thing. We like them, they've got a good enough reputation. So that's what we've been trying to do with Open Humanities Press, with the people who are in that collective. We're expanding that, so trying to do it on a larger scale with radical open access collective, it's very difficult, and people have to work strategically. And like I say, you have to make some responsible political and ethical decisions. And one of the things I often tell people I know that are in that situation, well, it's not an either or. It doesn't mean that you just have to publish with the legacy presses. You can do that, but you can also then experiment with some of the others. And it would be the same with something like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. You could have, if you felt like it and that was working for you, you could have a presence on there, but you would also explore and experiment with some of the other sides. And my idea would be to try and use it and turn it to your advantage. The thing is, no one now is going to go on Twitter and, you're not an early adopter anymore. You're just going to be one of millions of people on Twitter. Whereas if you get the next, whatever the next Twitter is, the next Instagram, and you're an early adopter, then you've got much more chance of even getting the things that you want in terms of reputation and perhaps stardom. The bigger conceptual question is, do we want to be rethinking the whole system so that we don't necessarily have academic stars? Do we want to be, I've got colleagues working in the centre that I help run, working on things like citations and referencing and who gets referenced. And should we be thinking about that? Should we be using technology to be thinking about why we referencing the same few people all the time from the same few places? Should we be referencing more people, not just from Canada, but from different parts of the world, from the south, from the global east? Should we be trying to do that? Why are we kind of perpetuating this system?
Yeah, actually, well, maybe then you can give me some advice about the website. I was trying to make certain decisions early on. This strikes me as one decision I was trying to make and negotiate, because there would be an ideal situation in which anyone would interview with me, and therefore I would be able to select anyone. But in reality, so the academic superstars that are super busy and looking for very big media exposure, I can't offer that. And so I can't necessarily get that, but I don't want to basically interview anyone, because I've listened to certain things where they're asking, pretty specialized knowledge questions to people who don't necessarily excel, or they're not necessarily experts in those fields. And I'm not that interested in that. But one of the things I was asking myself is, do I want to interview people who are very early or very starting out, and therefore don't have any kind of significant reputation in the field. And that way they can hopefully get their message across, but also the audience will be probably much, much smaller? Or do I want to go for like really major publishing people who have very large audiences, who really don't need any more exposure whatsoever? And so, I ask kind of jokingly about myself, but in reality, it goes back to that issue of, should we be quoting the same people? There's a benefit, there are certain benefits to talking to and to exposing people who already have a lot of exposure. And then there are certain benefits, but also drawbacks to people who have very little exposure but might get their ideas out there. How do you think in general, or in the website, that academia works best? Because to me, there's just so many books, there's so many articles, there's so many things out there. There seems to be some kind of need for a canon, if not a canon, then some sort of star level or star system, for lack of a better term. But also, I don't think anybody is really a fan of that. So is there a way that you see it working better?
So none of this is to say that we don't have to make decisions. Or that we can just have it as a free-for-all, and we've got this tsunami of, like you say, texts and books and whatever, and that we can never make any choices. You've got to make some choices, but I suppose what I'm saying is, well, let's think about, let's not just have it as an unconscious way that we'll just go to books and we'll just go to the famous people because that's the obvious thing. Maybe we need to be starting to thinking, well, how are we actually making these? And so that you're already asking these questions is, it's really exciting, it seems to me. I suppose one of the things I'd be wanting to say is, well, it doesn't have to be an either or, as I said before. Maybe you could have some of the more well-known academics, but then you could use that as a way of getting people, so people will then get attracted to the website and the podcast, and that way you could make a space to include some people that people don't know about, but maybe they should. That's your job as an editor, isn't it? That's part of it, is to find new things and say, look, this is what people should know about. So it's not just that someone's an early career researcher are unknown that makes them interesting, that's not the interesting thing. It would be, look, is their work interesting? Are they doing some interesting things that you think people should hear about? The other thing, well, there's a few other things we might want to think about, but the other thing is, one of the things we've done is sometimes we have to give up control. It seems, and I don't know, but the way you've talked about it is it's just you doing this. Maybe you need to collaborate. And would you need to collaborate? And the obvious thing would be, yeah, you collaborate with someone else in the US or in Canada, but would you collaborate with people from different parts of the world? And that's really difficult. One of the things we've done with Culture Machine, we did 15 years of that journal, published lots of people, and some of them were well known, and some of them were less well known, and some of them over time became better known. But after a while, we felt we were just repeating ourselves. So one of the things we did is we gave the journal away. We gave it to earlier career scholars, one in Canada, actually, and another in Mexico. And we said, look, it's yours now. You need to take it, run with it, do what you want with it. And so that's taken a little bit of a time, because people in other parts of the world, we were talking to them just recently, Gabriella, who's running Culture Machine, co-editing it for us now, and she's talking about the different time scales that different parts of the world operate on, and the different academic time scales. And she was feeling that she couldn't keep up with that of us in the UK or the US. But we were saying, well, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's fine. Maybe you can publish on a different speed if that works. So that's partly what we need to do with that whole open agenda. One of the things that I worry about it is, and it's why European government and the UK government and the US government are very behind things like open access, is because they see it as a mode of competition. They see it as, let's get our research out there so it can kind of dominate the globe. So just making it open is not enough. What we need is we need to give people in other parts of the world the infrastructure, the technology, the skills, the know-how, so they can publish their own work. So you've got younger, earlier career scholars in those different parts of the world that they can start their own journals, that they can start their own press, and so you get that work out there. So they're not all having to feel like if they want to get published in an international journal, well, they have to know who's big in the US or the UK or Europe, which tends to be, maybe French. Italy went through a fashionable moment, but other than that, it's Americans, the Brits, Australians, Canadians. It's that kind of thing. It's important to try and break down some of those kind of patterns, if you like.
Yeah. No, and I think that one of the interesting things about the whole concept of pirate philosophy is that it forces you to refresh your thinking. In doing so, yeah, we have to, we always say that we have to question taken for granted common sense notions, but I don't think anyone is doing it on the level that a pirate philosopher, at least from your book, would do it. I'm curious now, do you have your sights set or your targets set on any other things than what you tackle in this book? Is there anything that you're working on now that we can expect to see from you?
Yeah, there's should be a new series come out from Open Humanities Press, Media Art Right Now, and I'm going to do a book in that called Mass Media, or How to Be Inhuman, and that's going to enact what we were talking about earlier, that if we're focused on the object, on the post-human, the non-human, what would it be to actually be consistent with that idea? How could we work with that? And it would also go back to something you were talking about earlier in the discussion about, can we reuse texts? Can we, what would it be if a text wasn't finished? If we can kind of, one of the examples I use is it's like, why do we always have to how do we have to publish something new all the time? Do we have to go and give a new paper all the time? Could there be something about iterating it in a different circumstances or a different way, or remixing with it or playing with it? So it's going to be playing with a lot of those ideas. And after that, I'm working on trying to take some of these ideas and work them in the context of the city. And can we rethink what it is to be a city in using some of these ideas, this kind of more distributed ways of working, these kind of take the idea from Chantal Mouffe of kind of multipolar census. There's not just one idea of how a city should work, but lots of different ones. So one of the things we're doing in the Centre for Postdigital Cultures at Coventry, which is where I work, we're kind of rethinking some of the infrastructure of the city. So kind of obviously we might be rethinking of what a library is, but we're looking at things like what a community and a community centre would be. We're talking about a different way, the post office, partly playing on the idea that most people don't go to work in offices anymore. There's a really high percentage of people, now with new media, they're working from home with their laptops and their tablets, and there's a surprisingly high percentage of people who work from their bed. So it's kind of, work is gone. This place where you travel to an office, and before that a factory, to places where you're after that. And what does that do for a city? And what does it do for our notions of the public and the private and all those kind of things? So we're trying to rethink some of the infrastructure of the city in the same way that colleagues have been rethinking, what a book is, what a press is, what a journal is. Can we do it with those kind of municipal institutions as well?
Yeah, well, I think, I appreciate what you're doing, and I think the work that you're doing keeps people on their toes, which is really cool. And not just the pirate philosophy, but the Inhumanist Manifesto, which I recommend people check out too, which is really interesting. Can my audience expect 5 book recommendations from you?
You can, but you can also expect me to play with it a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think I look forward to seeing what you send me, and by the time this airs, we'll have that on the website, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me.
I'm going to be nervous. I don't want to get you kicked out of the country now.
Yeah, please don't do that. But if there's links to open or free content, I'm not opposed to that, as long as I'm not violating some U.S. copyright law that's going to get me kicked out.
Okay, I better go and rethink my 5 recommendations.
Well, no, Gary, I really do appreciate it.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed it. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks again for listening to This Is Not a Pipe podcast. If you haven't already, please check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else you can think about, YouTube, and leave a review if you haven't already. I really appreciate that. To everyone, enjoy the holidays, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.